Again, as Rachel just said, welcome to our Oceanside Chat. We are extremely privileged to have Victoria here today. I'm going to give a very brief introduction so that she can get going and we can save time for questions and answers at the end. She does have a hard stop, so please bear in mind, don't wait to the last second to get some questions in. Victoria is the current Chief Executive Officer of PeopleKeep, a cloud-based software company providing benefits administration solutions to small and medium-sized businesses. She's an accomplished executive with a whole litany of experiences in the provision of software, primarily in healthcare. She is experienced in leading strategic transformations and driving large-scale growth in technology-driven organizations. Prior to PeopleKeep, Victoria was a chief marketing officer at Bamboo HR, another human resources platform technology business. Her career in business to business B2B software includes leadership roles in global sales, marketing, and business development. And she has spanned a number of industries, but most notably healthcare and IT, where she was at GE Healthcare and Walters Kluwer Health. And to my great pleasure, she is a graduate of one of my alma maters, an AB, bachelor's degree with magna cum laude from Harvard College. And then after that, she completed her MBA at Harvard Business School. She sits on a number of cultural boards, including the Natural History Museum of Utah, as well as the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And Victoria, thank you so much for being here today. We're all excited to learn from you.
Well, thank you, David. That was a very kind introduction. I'm excited to be here. I think this may be a somewhat different presentation because as my background suggests, I'm really coming at this more from an operator perspective than necessarily a startup perspective. But I think there are some hopefully helpful lessons that we can apply to startups from more mature businesses. Obviously, I've also been involved in very big businesses like WK and GE. So today I'm going to talk about strategy and planning, and they're related, but distinct. And I'm really hoping we can have interactivity, which I think may be a little hard with everybody on mute, but we'll use like raising our hands or chat because I think everybody will get more out of this if it's a dialogue than me just sort of chatting at you. But I do have slides.
You're okay with being interrupted?
I would love to be interrupted, actually.
Okay.
So because I think you can learn as much from each other as you can from me. So I think one thing to think about in terms of strategy that can require a lot of discipline is a lot of your strategy is what you're actually going to say no to, what is going to, be out of scope. And I'm wondering if people have actually done that explicitly for their startups, where you've explicitly communicated what you won't do, who you won't serve, what problem you're not solving. Has anybody done that? Can chat or raise your hand or is that kind of like, seems a little weird, like, hey, we're supposed to be open to possibility and agile and, open to pivoting. I'd be curious if people are having like a little bit of a reaction to, oh, I'm supposed to be saying no to a lot of things and being really clear and disciplined about that. Okay, yes, definitely for target market definition. Okay, that's a good one, I would say, to say no to. Anything else like, hey, we're not going to use this lever of growth. We're not going to actually go raise money until we hit a certain milestone. Okay, a little quiet there. What I would really recommend is that you do get explicit about your no's and then you revisit them. So I'll give you, I think market segmentation is a really good one. If you're if your solution is targeting SMBs, small and medium businesses, which my current company, PeopleKeep, does, I can tell you the question and then the allure of going up market to enterprise is there like all the time. investors are going to ask you, partners are going to ask you, customers may ask you. Same thing at Bamboo HR, which you may or may not be familiar with. You should be familiar with them. They are very successful, very large SaaS company, totally pretty much bootstrapped all along the way. I think they have been very, very successful in part because they have been very clear about staying true to serving an SMB customer. And then all the decisions that come after that, like how important it is to have simple to use software. And so they're prepared to lose customers at the higher end of their segment because of the way they've designed the software and their sales model. And I know I came in, and I think one of the very first questions I asked was, have you considered going up market to enterprise? And I got a very clear no. And that was very helpful. That aligned the whole organization around that was a no-go zone. And so then, it came up, but you would be like, nope, we recommit to the segment we're going to serve, and we moved on. So I would encourage everyone, if as you're thinking about strategy, to really be explicit about what is no, what falls below the line, who are you not going to serve, and do that with investors, but also with colleagues, employees, partners, customers, etc. Anybody want to argue the opposite? Okay, I will keep moving then. Okay, so I think these are all pretty commonly understood elements of strategy, but the problem you want to solve, your ideal customer profile, the segment you want to serve, those are all pretty common. I would argue that thinking about how you go to market, particularly early on, is a really critical part of your strategy. So are you going to work through partners? Are you going to use an inside sales team? Are you going to do inbound only or outbound? All of those are elements of strategy. And then how you value your solution. So are you going to use a premium model? What is your pricing strategy? I regret, I don't think in the past I have always paid enough attention to price as a strategic lever, and not just what the price is, but how your pricing structure. And it's so critical to financial success, but also to strategy. They really are intertwined. How you price your go-to-market, the customer you're serving, what value you're providing to them. Is everybody at the stage where they haven't gotten around to thinking about pricing yet?
We're thinking about pricing.
Okay. Are most people at a stage where they're like, pricing is still, TBD?
I think you can get a very varied answer.
We're thinking about pricing as well.
Okay. I would encourage, even if it feels maybe early, to start thinking about pricing. And there's a lot of science behind pricing. So somebody's asking, what is the best strategy for pricing? And I think it depends, right? It depends on who you're serving, what your solution is. But the pricing, thinking about that earlier, maybe is better than later. So I'm seeing a lot. I haven't thought about that yet. I'm like, I might start thinking about that and doing some research or seeing if you can find someone. There are these pricing. There's actually a professional pricing society. I have had pricing folks on my team who've gone to that meeting. It used to be an annual meeting, which I always thought would be fun to be a fly on the wall. But there's a lot of science actually behind pricing. And I think thinking about how your pricing fits your go-to-market model and how you're going to get early traction, I would encourage thinking about that maybe earlier than you think you need to, because it's so integral. And maybe if you don't know a lot about pricing, starting to do some reading or asking for some research. If you think about, the classic razor blade example, that is absolutely totally fundamental to everything, is how the products are priced, right? And what's your, do you have a loss leader like the actual razor versus the blades? So worth giving some thought to how you value your solution, and then you know, how you differentiate and compete. Competing on price is a pretty tough place to be. So think about that as you're thinking about price. But for those who are like, hey, we're still really early, I would say start planning around pricing. It is really very, very, and it may impact your roadmap and how you want to think about, you know, what you're building. Okay, who is familiar with this acronym, the HIPPO problem or the HIPPO bias? Anybody know what the acronym stands for? It does not stand for the really large animal that you see. I will just give you that. Anybody want to guess? Okay, it is the highest paid person's opinion is overweight. So for anybody who's been in a large company, I'm going to guess that you have seen this in action. And since most of you have your cameras off, I can't see a lot of nodding, but I'm going to assume that once the acronym was explained, it made sense to people. Who here thinks they might be the hippo? People are looking at this and saying, I don't look like that. My guess is you guys are all the hippo. And it's worth keeping in mind. I can assure you I'm the hippo in my organization. So my thoughts get overweighted. And as you're starting to think about strategy and big questions and what those answers are to those big questions, I would encourage you to keep in mind just how damaging the hippo effect can be, because you kind of get an echo chamber and people were very accustomed to deferring. You know, your name is on the door, or you have the title, right? Or you've been at the company for longer than anybody else. And that can, as you start to, you know, you want debate over strategy, you want to think about alternatives. If your voice is overweighted, you're injecting risk in, and it is very, very common. I do use the word ubiquitous, like it, I have seen it my entire career. I don't think I was always aware of it my entire career, but looking back, you see it from small organizations to big organizations. It is just kind of part of how we roll. And I think you want to be conscious of that as you start making strategic decisions. Okay, so remember the hippo effect. Does anybody have any tactics they might suggest for how to avoid the hippo effect or counterbalance the hippo effect? You can put it in chat.
I have one, but it only really works in person, which is to have strategy meetings with round tables.
Okay, so you're not sitting at the head of the table and everybody's looking in your direction. That's a good one. Anybody else?
Something that we try to do to make sure no one's afraid of speaking up is try to create an environment where everyone can share something. But then also during meetings when people are being a little bit quiet, like reaching out to them specifically by name and asking for any ad hoc thoughts to share across the board on the topics to kind of let them feel more comfortable shouting things out for like quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. Other thoughts? I like the one, you know, how do we inject the voice of the customer into our meetings? That's in the chat. You know, how do we have somebody advocating for the customer as the hippo in the room instead of an internal hippo? That's a good idea. Other thoughts?
So I have a little bit of a interesting situation, or kind of opposite, if you will. Although I constantly welcome, you know, dissension and devil's advocacy and all of that from my team, I also have a CTO who's a former CEO of a much larger company. And I have an advisor who's a real close member of our team, who was a very early employee at Qualcomm and stayed there for many, many years.
No,
So
Qualcomm,
those
wow.
two had, one of them is 6'8", and he's also, you know, the CEO, former CEO, so he's overbearing automatically. And then the other one is, you know, just full of really good ideas. And so my challenge is a little bit more of toning those two down so that we can hear from some of the others.
Yep.
And so I just take that offline with each of them. If you have any other suggestions,
I do.
like to hear them.
I thank you. That's a very nice tee up for this slide. So I have some I would call them very technical techniques. And I am actually aware of the height bias. And it is true, if you are a 6'8" man, you are going to often be the hippo just on the basis of your actual size, right? And you get used to it. These are a couple of ideas, and Thomas, you may be doing this as well to sort of get that dissension you want, or make sure the main dissenters kind of quiet down, Mark, so that you can get other voices into the conversation. They're very tightly tied. Before I go into this, I do think there are a few other implicit biases that you might want to be aware of, just in general, but also as you're doing strategy planning, which is we tend to have an affinity bias. We like and listen to the people who seem like us, and we also hire for affinity, right? And so bear that in mind as well. And we have our favorite people that we think are super smart, always have great ideas, and we often go to them first. Somebody described it as the halos and horns effect, like the hippo effect. It's often very prevalent and you're not aware of it. So, the people you like to listen to and the people you maybe don't like to listen to. I would say as founders and people trying to build culture, but also make good decisions, the more you're aware of these implicit biases and the effects they have on discussion and decision, and I'm mostly interested in decision, the better off you'll be. And this is normal, by the way, like humans we have implicit biases. It is pretty normal to let the 6'8" guy be a little bit more dominant. That doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make him a bad person. It's just being human. But I think as I've become more aware of my own weaknesses, I'm really trying to raise my antenna on these effects and these biases and how they impact decisions, because you want the best decisions you can. So Mark, one way you might do this is mix up the order of how people go, whether you're virtual, around a table, or whatever else. If you're aware that usually person X, I'll call him Schmedley jumps in first, trying to make sure, just say, why don't we start with Nancy instead of Schmedley? The other way is you could make Schmedley the facilitator and say, today's job is for you to facilitate and ask questions and to draw people out or to take the notes. And that kind of takes them, if you're explicit enough about what makes a good facilitator, that takes them a little bit out of the, I'm going to just hammer my contributions into this meeting all the time. I have found that with some coaching, most people make an excellent facilitator when they realize that that's their role. And it's a great way to either get somebody very quiet to start stepping into a leadership role,
right.
or the opposite, to get somebody who just loves to
Hadn't
talk.
thought of that, but I have found it's a good way to engage the person who's normally quiet. So it's a great idea, and I will try it soon.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Has anybody used sticky notes before? So nonverbal. Do we think sticky notes work in a virtual environment?
If you use Miro or a virtual sticky note system, it can work. I
think chat works. We have even been known to ask people to write on a piece of paper and to hold it up like this. Yes, no, like you don't have to. I should preface, sorry, let me go back. So our company, PeopleKeep, we went overnight to 100% virtual on Friday, March 13th, 2020, which many people will remember that date. Like just COVID hit and everybody left and did not come back. Full stop. And we're staying 100% virtual. We've actually broken our lease and we've moved to a completely remote culture. So figuring out how you do things like sticky notes, because we did use sticky notes quite often as a way to avoid some of that authority bias too, and the hippo bias. Oh, Victoria, suggested this. I'm going to pile on. If you write a sticky note and everybody has to go put it on the whiteboard at the same time, you get a more unbiased answer. But how you do that in a virtual environment, there are many ways you can do it. Even the act of having somebody write it down, they don't have to show it, right? And then say, can you read what you wrote? Can have the same a pretty good proxy for a sticky note. You can't do it in this meeting because you guys are, but a technique we use a lot and it works very well with Zoom or Google Hangout is the hand. Okay, on a scale to 1 to 5, how bought in are you on this decision? Hold it, and we'll literally count down on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Everybody's hands have to go up. 1, 5, 3. And then the facilitator could say, oh, John, why are you a 1? So that works well to do that. The other thing you might consider is assigning, particularly if you're, trying to figure something out. Should we build this versus that? Assign a contrarian. It sounds a little like high school debate team. I assume most of you were at some point assigned a side that you had to argue, even if you didn't necessarily believe it. I can't see nodding heads, but I'm going to assume that that's a fairly common experience. Do that at your company, right? With your co-founder. Okay, I'm going to argue side A. You got to argue side B. And then what they've shown in social science is it's hard to be the contrarian. They've shown all this groupthink stuff, right? People will literally be looking at something and say something different because 5 people before them. So there's all sorts of social experience. As you get larger, you may want to assign your contrarian a buddy so that they don't feel, they feel they have backup. But I'm trying to come up with really tactical ways to overcome that hippo effect, the affinity bias. Yes, speak last is a common one. I see that in the chat, but sometimes that doesn't solve the problem of there are 5 of you and 2 of you are really quiet. So you go last, but the 2 quiet people, how do you get them in the conversation? But speak last is a good idea. I've heard people say, use hash marks for how often you've talked in the meeting. And then I do it and I'm so appalled. Right? It's way more than you think. You're like, shoot, I thought I was, moderating. Any other techniques or somebody want to ask a question around this?
I had a question.
Please.
So you said there's bias about physical appearance. And so over the past year during Zoom calls, do you think there's been less of that or the same amount?
That's a great question. I'm not a social scientist. I don't know. I would say probably less. Because just you walk into the room and everybody kind of looks at the pecking order. And I should say that I'm I like to say I'm 5'6". I'm trying to get up there. But, I would guess that maybe that helped neutralize that a little bit. And I think by the way, that's not the most important one. I think the most important one is the authority bias and the you guys are super invested in what you're doing, right? It's your thing. Maybe your opinion should count more, but when it's overweighted in the debate, you might lose some really good ideas. And that has nothing to do with your physical appearance, right? That's really the sort of authority bias. Hopefully these are helpful techniques. I welcome afterwards. You can tell me if you tried one and if it worked or not. I will keep moving on. So I know some people are quite early here, but I'm wondering if people have articulated a strategy, cadence, and format. Hey, we're going to talk about strategy once a quarter, once a year, every week.
Every 2 weeks.
Okay.
No, not us.
Okay. I would, of course, big companies have whole cadences around all this stuff and strategic planning and everything else. I guess my encouragement is to remember that talked a lot about strategy, but execution eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week. And it's not me saying that, it's John Doerr. So, take that for what it's worth. I would encourage you to think about what is the right cadence and then try to stick to it. If you're doing a strategy session every 2 weeks, even as, a very early stage incubating ideas, that might be too much. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what what execution looks like versus strategy. The GE has many GEisms. Am I the only GE alumni here? Probably. And I am coming from the Jeff Immelt era. So a GEism that, for better or for worse, was a say-do ratio. A lot of strategy is sort of saying what you want to do. I would focus on the doing part, and that's what the say-do ratio means in a GEism. But it's not a bad little thing to have in the back of your mind as you're thinking about what is our say-do ratio. But I would encourage everybody to think about what is our bias towards action and doing versus sort of strategizing. Has anybody ever asked a colleague, a co-founder, an investor, a mentor, how am I doing on execution? What's my say-do ratio look like?
Yeah.
Nobody? All right. For those of you who can see David Eason, he is on the board of PeopleKeep, and he might, I'll maybe ask him that tomorrow in our board meeting. I would encourage you to say, okay, how am I on strategy? And then how am I on execution? Give me a grade. To someone you trust, whose opinion you value, and that you'll take action on it. Ideally, you're good at both, but if you have to be good at one, I would encourage you to be good on execution. Thank you, Dave, for the thumbs up. And that may sound a little orthogonal because, we're often told these stories about, you start and you're a visionary and you want to, you have this mission to change the world or solve this problem, and you get personal gratification out of that. In fact, you probably need that in order to go start something, right? So our strengths and our weaknesses, but for actual success, nothing beats execution and that bias to action. And this is where the whole idea of sort of iterating, agile development, but get something done, because you will learn way more from doing that than you will having lots of strategy sessions, trying to impact the hippo effect, using lots of sticky notes. I mean, those are all important, but in the end of the day, doing is where the rubber hits the road. And in most big organizations and mature organizations, it is all about doing. And there's something to be said for that. And if you think that is not maybe a strong suit, I would encourage you to think about, how do you hold yourself accountable and others for that? What happens if you miss a deadline? Do you even set deadlines? These are all they may sound old-fashioned, but I actually really think they are the key ingredients to success. And it's not just me. You can find John Doerr has a lot of quotes in this area. He is very, very clear on how he thinks about this. So the process is critical. The plan itself isn't. And that's where I think a lot of large companies really fall down. It ends up being about how beautiful is your slide deck for your board or your senior exec, but the actual plan, where you make decisions and you debate them and you articulate them and then you set timeframes, the actual planning process, that is what's important. That's where you clarify your priorities. I am not recommending designed plans. There needs to be no chevron charts. Does people know what I'm talking about? Has anybody been a strategic consultant? I started my career as a strategy consultant. No one. Okay, that kind of makes sense because you're all entrepreneurs now. The number of hours I spent creating chevron charts to show the strategy and the phases, that is not what I am recommending you do. Spend no time on that. Spend time on the process. What are our key milestones? How are we going to measure that? How are we going to hold people accountable? I don't care if it's handwritten, and then you take a photograph and you share it with your co-founders. Like that is the how pretty it is not the point. The process to get there and to be really clear on what decisions you're making, that's really the point. And I do think sometimes we get too caught up on like what the plan looks like. So it's not just me. I love Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? Like your plan is going to change. So creating some beautiful thing that's not the point. It's the process and then the going back and saying, okay, we just got punched in the face. How are we going to adjust the plan? That's really the key, because I was pretty sure when I put these slides together that the second I started talking about planning, half the people were going to go get a coffee during this talk. Because in my experience, if you're, an entrepreneur and you're more, you're willing to take on more risk and other things, the word planning sounds really dull, right? It just is not what gets you out of bed every day and say, whoa, this is exciting. I think the process is really critical though. And if you can make yourself not go get a coffee during these slides, there might be some real benefit here for your organization and where you go on it. Just remember that the plan isn't the point. The process is in making the decisions. That is the point. Needs to be dynamic. Making the same point here, like you want it to be agile. So I would think about a planning cadence, and I wondered if I wrote it down. Okay, so I'm just going to share what we do at PeopleKeep. So we do not have a 5-year strategy. I want to be really clear. We're more mature than where you guys are in but I don't believe in 5-year strategies or plans. We kind of have like a 1-year strategy and a 1-year financial plan that we do on an annual basis with sort of a mid-year update. So there's a model, there are sort of the themes for the year, and there's a big strategy session, a sort of series of sessions, and we do that once a year. And then we do quarterly OKRs. Who here is familiar with the acronym OKR? Anybody? Okay. Objectives and key results. Does that sound familiar to people? And it's comes from Google, et cetera. There is a lot of, thank you, Bobby. There is a lot out there if you want to do OKRs. So we do a quarterly objectives, which are where you want to go. So they're qualified, not quantified. And then your key results are quantified, and they're generally metrics or milestones. So we do that on a quarterly basis by team. Then we have a monthly scorecard, which, if you're go to market, might be more along key milestones, but for us, it's like key results. So signups, churned customers, et cetera. NPS. So, you may have a scorecard that's just like number of potential customer interviews we want to do every month while we're thinking about what we're building, right? Before we go to market. So you may say that's in our scorecard. And then we sort of align around a sprint methodology, and we do that in more than just engineering. So I assume most of you guys are using an agile methodology for software engineering. We use it for business intelligence, and we use it for marketing. So we're doing sprints there with a sprint planning process. I think probably the biggest takeaway I might suggest for you guys from our experience is to have a weekly commit, to get down to what are we doing? What is each person, if you're small enough, what is each person committing to getting done this week? Does anybody do that now?
Do it daily.
Okay, daily. Through a stand-up.
Well, we have a virtual meeting every morning.
Yeah, okay. I would call that a stand-up. Yep. Real quick, like.
Yep, 15 minutes. And then every 2 weeks, we have more of a strategy brainstorming meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we actually use we call it or 4 square because it's a slide with 4 quadrants, but every team has a weekly commit on like what are they getting done that week. And then some teams like marketing do a daily stand up, as does engineering, which is sort of just, but that way everybody's clear at the end of the week, we're going to have these things done. So Gabe is saying, hey, we do a quarterly OKR and a daily meeting. Yep, that makes sense. You may want to just put a quick thing in that's, you know, can be bullet points. What are we doing this week that you use in your daily stand up, which is sort of a check-in. As you get closer to go to market or in market, I'm a big believer in transparency. So we actually have our customer acquisition funnel. Everybody can see. So they can see how many, so we're a SaaS business and we rely heavily on SEO. So everybody in the company, doesn't matter who you are, can see number of website sessions, leads, qualified leads, opportunities, and signups. So, you know, B2C, you could do something similar. We're B2B, but I would encourage that sort of transparency. And then you can go look and say, oh, we said we were going to do 12 signups this week. I made that number up. I see we only did 8. Hopefully somebody's like, how can I help? Or what's, you know, what's the root cause for that miss? But the transparency and the plan and the commitments, they all kind of go together to drive to that bias to action and to get things done. And, you know, iterate on what's working and what's not. Does anybody else use like a common, I mean, you probably have like a Jira board or something like that, but does anybody else has a common tool that sort of shows progress for everybody in the company to see at any time? I should say we're a G Suite company, so everything's in Drive. In fact, my slides are in Drive.
We just use a spreadsheet that we've made that suits our needs. You know, it's a kind of a calendarized spreadsheet so that it's constantly moving forward. And
Okay.
We've tried so many different platforms, and
Yep.
I don't know what Jira is, but we've tried, you know.
It's like Trello.
Trello we've tried, yes.
They're very similar.
Yeah.
Okay, Hazel says smart sheet with a Jira board, a Gantt chart, and email reminders. Yep, those work. We use Slack a lot. We don't tend to do a lot of reminders. We hope that people are, you know, their manager is going to remind them if they're missing milestones or other things. So ours is our scorecard is literally a Google sheet. And yes, we use Jira for other things, but we, if you want to know kind of how the business did on our key metrics, which are really for us, it's churned customers and signups, those two, obviously one's net revenue in, one's net revenue out. You see that real time in a Google sheet for us. And then we set, you know, our key results are tied to those often for most places, for most functions in the organization. I will say something that's pretty cool that, you know, maybe down the road and is a little off from planning, but is definitely transparency, is how many people here use Slack? Anybody using Slack?
Sometimes. Not
Every day.
Every day. Does anybody, has anybody, are people familiar with Zapier? Or Zapier? I say it wrong, and there's Zaps. I will say this is very cool. So we use Zapier. Zaps are basically integrations, and you can integrate from System X into Slack. So for instance, we have a sign up, an online sign up that customers go through. When they complete and hit payment, I see it in Slack as a zap. It's a little, everybody can see it. So you can celebrate successes that way. It's quite, I am not a paid endorser of Zapier, but it's a level of transparency that has been really, really cool and helps people, you know, and it's all automated. You don't have to do anything. So that might be just something to consider if you are already using already using Slack, is to use some some zaps from, if you're using HubSpot or Salesforce, or, even your own development platform, if you hit certain milestones. But, this probably sounds a little bit like big company stuff, but I think OKRs are really, really critical for, even if you're a team of 4, doing an OKR, whether that's monthly or quarterly, really helps you figure out where do we want to go? How will we know if we're getting there? And then kind of what are the projects behind that? I found this on the internet, and I was a little concerned about the pronoun I here, because to me, OKRs are all about the we, like it's about alignment, even across 3 people, 5 people, the size doesn't matter, but certainly as you go up in size, it becomes more important to align around OKRs. So for those not familiar with it, the objective is sort of the description, and the key result is the metric. And then we don't actually use initiatives in our Foursquare but they're behind there. They're the projects behind that. But that's an OKR.
Victoria, can I stop you for one
Yes,
second?
please.
I think there was a hand raised by Lauren.
I'm sorry, Lauren. Please go ahead.
No, I think that's from earlier. I was just saying that I use Slack and I really enjoy it as a method of communication between my other teams.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm also not a paid endorser of Slack, but I like Slack too. But I really like the automated updates from things like I can see every time we cancel a customer, I see it.
Victoria, just
yes.
Just so that you know, for teams that are recruited into the Viterbi Startup Garage, one of the first steps that each team has to do is to work with one of our IIRs, who's actually the director of training for PayPal, I believe, to develop their OKRs and then to upgrade them on a quarterly basis. Again, this is mandatory. So for any teams that you're a little bit behind in that, talk to Dana and let's get it done.
Okay. So I apologize if this is redundant for people, but hopefully I'm singing from the same songbook. There is a reason it's required.
So thank you. Yes.
Yes. So I'm here to reinforce that this is, this is not gnash your teeth. Oh, this feels like silly work or whatever. This is not. I really, really don't feel like this is bureaucracy or whatever somewhat pejorative term you want to use for this. I think OKRs are really, really, really key. I thought this one was just fun for people who are into football. So I would leave you with, as innovators and visionaries, the word strategy and planning, particularly planning, may not be your thing. It may sound like, well, this is exactly why I'm not working at GE, is I don't want to spend time on planning. I think they're really key, though, in the end of the day, to scaling your operations and to success. And probably where I'm most able to add value, just based on my own background and where PeopleKeep is in our maturation cycle. But would love to hear how people are doing with kind of facilitating strategy meetings, using OKRs, using a scorecard. At some point, I hope everybody gets to the point where your scale is going to require this, at which point maybe you look back on this presentation and say, oh, there was more value than I thought. But I think it can be valuable at any stage. I would just encourage you to keep in mind that I like strategy, but I would not spend a ton of time on strategy. I would spend a lot of time on execution and that bias towards action. And again, not so much time on producing a plan and time on like the actual, planning and breaking that plan up into very clear action items down to a daily basis, but certainly a weekly basis. I think that was my, yes, that was my end. And I got about 15 minutes. So I'm happy to take other questions or have people, they want to be the contrarian and argue the opposite point of view to anything I've said, that would be awesome.
Just to reiterate, everybody, Victoria has a hard stop in 15 minutes. So if you have any burning, pressing questions, do not be bashful. else, I will start peppering Victoria with questions.
And feel free to just put it in chat too, if that's easier for people just to type there.
Gabe, why don't you just go ahead?
Yeah, so comment and a question. Just reinforcing the value of OKRs. I found that before we worked with Dana and implemented those, anything that looked like an opportunity to go in 1,000 different directions was something we would chase. And as soon as we established OKRs, it enabled us to say no very clearly and quickly to keep us on track. And then the question there is for early stage startups, what is a good way to break down kind of OKRs in realms that you're not too familiar with, like without getting overly researchy? So I guess to give you context, we are looking at user acquisition and to build a marketing plan. We don't know anything about this. So we've developed a very simple OKR, and that's acquire 1,000 beta users. What's your feedback on that, and where would you take it from there?
Yeah, I do think there's this temptation because, you know, we have the internet to do a ton of research, and at some point I would say no. So let me see. So acquire 1,000 beta customers. Okay. And is your objective there to see if your software is working or whatever your product is? Is it to get feedback on the roadmap?
It's to get feedback on if the product is working effectively in a controlled state, so we can get a smaller and more closed feedback loop before we promote it further.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not answering your question. I think I'm getting down in the weeds. And of course, I do have a marketing background. Well, I will say this. This is, first of all, you have each other. So you have this community. I don't know how you use it, but you know, a half-hour conversation, and I'm happy to be that person, by the way, for you, because I do have a marketing. We'll cut through a lot. Like you can learn a lot in a half hour. So I've had to learn quite a bit about. I don't have a software engineering background, so I use my friends and my former colleagues, and most people are very generous in sharing their expertise. So I think if you were to pose how do I think about OKRs, you know, good marketing objectives, and what are the key results I want around that? Gave to 2-3 friends, or, you know, people through, you know, friends of friends through LinkedIn. That's probably how I would solve that problem in a very tactical way to start. But simple is good, by the way. I will show you. I have a visual. I use this a lot. Is that backwards for people? And they're like, oh, they're like, oh, you're a fan of the band. I'm like, no, actually not a fan of the band. For people not familiar with the acronym, it's keep it simple, stupid, which isn't so polite. But I often, and it's literally, I could pull it up here because, and that's the no part, right? Is keeping it simple. Is if we're chasing every shiny object, we are not keeping it simple or strategic. You replace the S. So I think starting simple is a good idea. You might want to think about upstream, like what activity do we need to do to get those beta customers, and then downstream, how are we actually going to, not all are we getting feedback just by looking, you know, at inspect lists, or are we going to survey or whatever else? You know, we want 50 of those 1,000 beta users to interact with us in some way and give us qualitative feedback. Might be another key result from that. Thinking off the top of my head, but simple is not bad. If you don't know anything about marketing and your OKR is that simple, you'll build from there. But also happy to help. But most people, I have found that most people are super generous, particularly if you time bound your request. I'd love a half hour of your time, and they will share with you examples of OKRs. They'll give you, and a half hour is worth, you know, a lot of time surfing the web.
And again, forgive me for interjecting, Victoria, but Gabe, that's what the IIRs are for. Each of our IIRs has built and sold a company, in some cases a fairly large company. They've been through the trenches. That's what they're there for. So once again, for all of you who are VSG teams, and we have the folks on this call, it's a wider community than just our teams. But if you are at VSG, use your IIRs. That's what they're there for.
Thank
I
you,
have
Dave.
a question, unless
Please.
somebody else does. Okay, so you mentioned that your scorecard really is built around 3 simple metrics. It's churn, customer, and signups. And churn is net revenue out, and signups is net revenue in. Hypothetically, let's say you have a down curve on your signups and an up curve on your churn. How do you adjust your go-to market, in a sense, strategy? What are the actions that you would be taking?
Oh, okay. This is a very different question. So churn is outstripping new customers, right? And so that's an equation, right? It's again, you may choose to say, I can only target one side of the equation. So I'm going to focus on reducing churn, or I'm going to focus on increasing new signups. We are always like, I always want to put an and there. I'll just tell you, naturally, I'm like, oh, but sometimes we have limited resources, and some of our is to say, no, I actually, our organization cannot effectively address both sides of the equation right now. Sometimes you can, right? Yes, like Group A is going to focus on customer acquisition because I've got people with those roles, and Group B. But I would say in your hypothetical, the first thing I would do is say, which one feels, if I could only tackle one side of the equation, which one feels more urgent? And that sometimes depends on, where you are in your fundraising, what investors are looking for. And of course, there's no one on this call who wouldn't say it would be better to do both, right? Let's increase signups and reduce churn. But sometimes like you can't do both. So I would say, think about whether it's a both or an or, and which way you want to start. And then depending on, so I'll talk about customer acquisition just because I have a marketing background. I would think about what channels you have in place. Do we need to add a channel? Review sites versus SEO versus paid social versus partner versus referral versus, I think about adding channel, or I'd look at, is it a conversion issue? Am I not getting signups because my funnel isn't converting? Okay, do I need to do something to better qualify leads? Do I need to change my salespeople? Do I need to do more training? How do I increase my win rate? So those are, if I were looking at how do I increase signups, that would be the questions I would ask, which are totally different than how do I decrease churn.
Right.
I will say that retaining a customer is usually more profitable than going out and getting a new one.
From an LTV type. Yeah. So the second part of my equation is we're a very early stage B2B SaaS business. And you went through the go-to-market strategies, partners, inside sales, outbound, inbound. I just want to hear from you which strategy you chose to grow PeopleKeep in the very early stages.
Yeah, so I wasn't with PeopleKeep at the very early stages. I think it really depends on your segment. So my background has been primarily enterprise B2B, so very large customers with lower churn rates and much longer even contracts. The concept of a month-to-month subscription, which we do at PeopleKeep day in, day out, is like, woo! So like you might as well be, whatever, speaking in ancient Greek. Of late, I've been in SMB SaaS businesses, and in SMB SaaS, I think this is true even of enterprise now, but the number one channel is SEO, and it's content, and it is a content game. Unless you're in a very, very well-defined market where you can really make paid work from the beginning. But I think everybody knows this at this point, whether it's enterprise or SMB, most buyers are doing a lot of research online first before they're ever contacting you. So if you're lucky enough to be in a space with something like review sites, your G2 crowds, I would focus heavily on that. If you're not, which we're not, focus heavily on SEO.
Thank you.
So
That's super helpful.
Content.
Thank you.
I have, I think, time for maybe one more question.
Anybody else out there?
Yeah.
I had one that I was kind of curious about. So you were talking about sort of like how you had bi-weekly sprints and you wanted to spend like not that much time with like your strategy. And then you also mentioned being like specifically agile and trying to work in the agile space and not doing like waterfall projects. And I was sort of wondering, how do you manage like keeping strategy being long-term with continuing and being able to stay agile and breaking it down to really small chunks? Like, what's your process there? Because like a lot of teams I've been with, like things just turn into like small waterfall projects instead of being like actually agile. So what do you do specifically?
We might be small waterfall too, but I think so. Our longest time frame is a year, right? And it's our financial year, and then we break it into quarterly, monthly, weekly, and then some teams do, and that's the weekly commit. So quarterly, monthly, bi-weekly sprint, weekly commit, and then some teams do a day-to-day stand-up. And ideally, that's all looping back to the annual plan, which we do try to review on a quarterly basis when we're doing our OKRs. So, okay, now we're 1 quarter into that plan. What do we need to adjust? So we are more, mature than folks here. You may say that is too waterfally, but it is, that's how we do it. It's kind of that breakdown of year, quarter, month, every 2 weeks, week, daily. And there's a different sort of tool for each of those, right? The daily, it's a stand up for the teams that do it, right? It's a bada boom, bada bang, boom, 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 boom. There's nothing really written. The weekly, it's literally a 1-pager and it's bullet points. And you just kind of keep it as agile as possible. And it's very focused on what is the commit for this week, not the activities, but like at the end of the week, what will we have? We'll have a drafted customer survey. We'll have 3 new blog posts, whatever that is. It's essentially a key result in a micro format. Does that help? Okay, I'm glad that was helpful. This was fun. I can probably squeeze in one more question, but otherwise, I welcome feedback. You can route it which way, certainly through Dave Eastman. If you haven't had a chance to work with Dave, it's really fun.
The last question, if you want to just share any thoughts on this, any key big mistakes people make or uniquely good OKRs, any of like the major positives or major negatives that have hit you over the past when looking at OKRs?
Yeah, and I should say I didn't grow up with OKRs. I had to learn them. Too many. So I will now have 12 objectives for this month with 24 key results. And you're like, really? Which ones are most important? If I had to draw a line through half of these, that would be, I think, the most common thing is too much. And then I think the second most common thing is having a hard time keeping the objective qualitative and the key result quantitative. So I apologize. I hope this doesn't sound like I'm picking on someone, but I would say the objective is, gain beta customers in order to inject more insight into our product roadmap. That's an objective. The key result might be 1,000 beta customers, 50 customers have provided us whatever, did a one-on-one with a product manager, whatever else. But if I could have a KISS thing with an anti-ampersand, does everybody know what the ampersand is? It's the and symbol that kind of looks like a swirly, whatever. I am guilty. Everybody is guilty. We'd like to put an ampersand in wherever we can, or a slash. I always find it's funny. People are like, I'll use a slash instead of an ampersand. It's cheating. It's not making you make a hard decision about a no. A no is inevitably not an ampersand. And I would encourage you guys to think about where you're putting in the ampersands, or where you're like, yeah, and we'll just add all these objectives to our OKRs. And it's like, no, we got to say no. Like we got to be realistic about what we can do and then be super accountable for that. That would be, I hope that was a helpful answer.
Yeah, much appreciated.
Okay, so I need to get a little sticky that says no ampersand, and I will say I'm as guilty as anybody else. Well, thank
Victoria,
you. This is really fun. Yes.
Before we run out of time, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. It was really, really fun for me.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for coming here. What a great chat. And of course, we're going to do a little plug-in for our next week chat is with Elizabeth Reynolds talking about the Built-in Accelerator. But thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, Victoria, for speaking with us today.
Actually,
My pleasure.
I would love to give Victoria, I will see you tomorrow, but I would love to give just about 30 seconds of context for this.
Yeah.
I would encourage everybody to listen and watch the recording of this because it's very cool and trendy to talk about vision, especially when you're an entrepreneur, you have a great idea for a new company. Vision without execution, you may as well be sitting with your friends at Starbucks. And the thing is, be clear that investors understand that too. And I'm speaking of one who, has been singed over the years because we've had too much vision. When we brought Victoria into our company a couple of years ago, it was with an emphasis that we believed that she would bring execution and turn what had always been there as a vision into a thriving, growing business. And to say that she has delivered would be an understatement. So this is critical. When you meet with investors, don't spend all the time. Make sure that you tell the vision, you're going to do that, but make sure you tell them how you're going to get there. And the kind of details that you heard in the last hour, that's what's going to do it. So thank you again, Victoria. This has been outstanding.
Thank you. That was
Thank
very
you.
kind of you.
Thank you,
David. I
Victoria.
appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again. And don't forget, next week we have Elizabeth Reynolds. But have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel, by the way.
Anytime.
All right.